Today I'll show you how to code in Canvas. Can you create this game in Python? And now you can see, right, it's actually created the game.
What Aurora Foundation model does, it is trained on diverse atmospheric data such as ER5, CMP6. You can take this foundation model and train it for specific tasks for your area of interest. Maybe you're looking for a particular dimension of weather forecasting.
And this, my friends, is how we're going to achieve world peace. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Outpost podcast. Can you believe it? We've made it to episode 3. I'm hoping by now you've seen episodes 1 and 2, and you are intrigued, you like it, and that's why you've turned up for this one. Today, again, we're hoping we have a bunch of interesting things to share with you, what we've seen around the AI world and what's caught our interest. With that, we're going to get started. This time, we're going to start with Soham, who's going to talk us through something really interesting.
So today I'm just going to start with OpenAI's Canvas, right, which is a new way to interact with ChatGPT. Historically, I'm really interested in these kind of updates. I've been a big fan of Claude's artifact feature, which is exactly what they're trying to do with Canvas here. I don't know, Sarina, Dishant, you've used ChatGPT quite a bit, but many times when we interact with ChatGPT or Claude or one of these large language models, it's difficult to track context, right? Like say you're creating a book or a paper, or you're reviewing something or generating code, right? It becomes difficult to understand what's going on, right? You give it some input and then there's a lot of revision, and somewhere it becomes difficult to get a track of what's going on. Right? Have you faced this, Dishant?
Yeah, in fact, many times if I'm doing I want to learn more about a particular research paper, and then I'm just kind of asking questions that are interesting terms that I'm kind of learning for the first time. But then putting them into one session, sometimes it's helpful, but still it's confusing. I'm looking forward to see what you have in the box for us.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just becomes very difficult to track all of this, right? So that's why they've introduced Canvas. I would say it's a follow-up to Claude's artifact, right? They're trying to do something very similar, and it's not there yet, right? It seems to be moving in that direction. It's an early beta of sorts. If you have the pro version of OpenAI's subscription, then you'll probably get access to this within the next few days, right? So what it does is, let's say you're creating a document, it'll let you speak about the document, but create it on the right hand side, right? It's I would say a more a visual update, right, or an interaction update where it does pretty much the same thing. It's not a newer model like O1 was, right? It's the same 4.0. Eventually, they'll probably bring in 4.01 or some of these other models as well. But essentially, it's the way you interact with the entire system, right? So this is the blog post which talks about what is Canvas. Essentially, now you have 2 pages, right? So as a designer, right, what you've done, I'll just break this down, right? They have added some tools or some quality of life updates on the UI. That's pretty much it, right? So as a document creator, you want to improve the wording of some certain things. You want to remove emojis or add emojis. You want to explain, get something explained. You want to understand why something is working in such a way, or why something was generated, right? Or rewrite something. So it provides a lot of these tools in a much easier, more visual manner, right? That's what this update is, right? So what can you do today? Eventually, you'll be able to do a lot of things like Claude's artifacts feature. You can do pretty much anything with artifacts. But with ChatGPT today, you can review code, right? Okay, so you can code in Canvas. You can write in Canvas. All kinds of different writing tools are added to it. This is the second thing you can do. Then you can do a bunch of other things which I'll actually show, right? You can create images, you can summarize text, you can do pretty much all the same things, but it's essentially better to show you what this means, right? So typically if you'd have a conversation, you just start and it will be the entire conversation, right? But now you have all these options. You have O1 preview, you have O1 mini, right? Which Dishant had shown before, and you have the regular 4.0. But if you want to use this, you'll have to use the Canvas feature, which is in beta, right? So you have to select that and say, you can give it any prompts. Today, I'll show you how to code in Canvas, right? So I'll ask it, can you create a Tetris game for me? right? Now, coding is a very complex topic, and probably I'll show you a little bit more about coding, like Replit agents and Cursor and Claude and all these other tools for coding. But just to show you how Canvas works, so let's say, can you create a Tetris game in Python, right? Because it's easier to kind of explain it and easier to run it, right? So I'll just say, can you create a Tetris game using Python, right? And let's just run it and see what happens, right? So that's it. That's Canvas, right? Essentially, what it does is, rather than continuing the conversation in the same thread, which is what you definitely typically see, it does it on the side, right? This gives you a permanent kind of reference of what's happening, and then you can converse with the model and kind of improve things. And what I'll do is I'll just run this. So ironically, to run this, you can't run it on the system itself, which is a problem here, right? Like, I think it's the first version of Canvas. That's why you can't do it. In Claude, if you're using Claude artifacts with Sonnet, you can actually run this inside the environment, which is super important because you don't want to get out of this, right? But at least it's a good first start, right? Okay. I'm just going to copy this. It's generated all the code, right, which is in Python, and it's using some libraries in Python, right? So now what I've done is I've created a Replit instance. Replit is another cloud-based editor. It's very popular on mobile devices, and people love coding and learning on Replit essentially, right? So it's got the entire editor interface over here. This is a web browser-based editor, right? Like, it's got the Python file. I've just told it that I'm creating a Python project, right? So what I'm just going to do is copy this code over there. This is what you have to do, right? So it's not fully independent yet. It will not enable you to code and execute things here, but it's pretty close, right? So I'm running on the free project. I'm just going to click on run, right? It's going to kind of run all of this in the cloud, and you see there's an error over there, right? Let's see. Okay. Let us take the error. Okay, and I'm just going to run it back. Okay, let's see if it's actually fixable, right? So these are the things it can do. It can just kind of update it and figure out, right, what's going on, and you see it's going to scan all the lines of code, and sometimes it actually makes a definite it makes changes, right? Let's see if this works. And now you can see, right, it's actually created the game. I'm also fairly new to Replit, so you can see, okay, I can actually use my keyboard and my cursor, okay, to actually move this around. The bottom is not visible because, again, I have to just expand this properly, but you can see, right, it's a proper game. I can use my keyboard to change the order of things. Very simple but functional game, right? And it actually works, right? It's about 150 lines of code, right? It doesn't do everything. It uses the basic library of PyCame just to kind of create the basic mechanics of drawing and so on, right? But apart from that, it's a fully working game with different colors. You can actually customize it. You can make changes to it, right? So this is how you can run this in an external environment. You can run it on your device as well. But just to show you, right, like, it actually works, and it's much easier, right? You can imagine if you're finding errors, right? You can actually copy paste it and it'll fix things. You can ask different things, right? You can add comments, right? Add logs, or just ask it to change this to, let's say, JavaScript. It'll do it in JavaScript, right? So there are some predefined prompts, right? So that it's just easier for you, right? And in a similar way, you can also create, stories, or you can write on the platform. And there are a lot of great writing tools, right? Especially for authors, right? People who are very into language, right? And it can change the tone, right? It can do a lot of those things without losing your train of thought, right? Which is the important thing. Actually close this, and you can go back to the previous interface, which was already there. But then you have this option of opening the canvas and selecting which version. So there are different things that you can do over there. For example, today there are 2 different things it created with Canvas. You can switch between them and kind of ask it to make changes, right? Very simple update, but very powerful, right? Because now you can do different things in it. You can actually select something and ask ChatGPT questions, right? Please explain this. Slightly different kind of context, but kind of it gives you that ability to interact on a different level with with ChatGPT, right? So how's this going right now? I think it's a great starting point. There are few things you can do with it. You can't do much apart from like language coding and so on. But I expect this will be the future, right? Although this is a follow-up step to artifacts. With artifacts, what else can you do? You can actually export this piece of code, right? So I could actually run this piece of code in artifacts, run it over here. I can share it with you so you can run it on your end. I can create interactive ones so that I can update the artifact even though I'm not a creator. So artifacts gives you all those abilities, which is, I think, better than what ChatGPT can do. I think it's a great starting point, right? This is one of the newest features. And what we'll do in probably an upcoming episode is see, right, like how Replit has its own agents and Cursor has its own thing, right? How all of them compare with respect to coding, right? Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's really interesting update. If you're on the beta, definitely check it out. Really interesting kind of improvements, right? Which are more quality of life, less about the model, but just generally makes people more productive, right? Yeah, that's it. Dishant, Saranya, any questions?
Yeah, this is super fun. I think as a user, as a person who is, possibly not going to appreciate the nuances of every model update, but as an end user, I like that this is the next level of the arms race, which is from an experience, and it's not just great model, let's go, but it's also great model. Now, how can you use it? Because it's also more of how the everyday person is going to start interacting with the LLMs, and then trying to see that this is now going to be the point of differentiation. So no, I really like it, and thanks for calling out the distinctions you see between this and artifact. Um, I guess we'll have to see how this goes next. I mean, obviously, in terms of interaction methods, Notebook LM took it to a whole different level, and kind of seeing where that lies in all of this is going to be interesting. But yeah, I think we're off to a great start.
It's interesting because Notebook LM, all these are interesting interaction patterns. Essentially, it's the LLM in the back, but
Correct.
it's interesting to see Google, OpenAI, all these guys coming up with different ways of using the same LLM, right? Rather than a third person.
Yeah, this is beautiful. So thank you for kind of walking us through. Of course, I saw the blog post announcement and the buzz which was there in the news about it, but seeing this, absolutely, it blows your mind. Correct.
Yeah.
A couple of things I would kind of say that, like in a very early days in a product management journey, we have been taught that a product should do two things. Correct. One is a utility. The second is a usability. Utility is like what is supposed to do. Is it doing that? And usability is that how well is it doing it? So I think the Canvas plays really interesting thing on the usability side of it. It kind of people without much background context can find it easy to use, easy to ask, interact. So I definitely see this good. This will lead to much more adoption usage of ChatGPT. So that's a one observation. The second thing, when you were typing about the Tetris game, correct, and then we got into a bit of a kind of error there. I was hoping that can there be another agent, can be the another model which can have an oversight on top of it. So think of it as an ensemble of a model, correct? There are 2-3 models. One is writing or kind of a pair programming, and it can self-correct itself out of it. So I think that could be a next thing out of it, but super exciting. And the last thing on the Notebook LM you mentioned, correct? It's pretty interesting to see how different companies are taking different approaches. So ChatGPT, if you look at it, it started as a chat first interface to engage with LLM. Notebook LM, from my perspective, is like a data first or a document first, like experience where you have to upload something or put a link and then in that you can ask questions and generate and things out of it. I think both are very, very powerful. I personally haven't played with Artifact and Claudes, but I'm looking forward to it. Maybe you should do one more demo for us to kind of get started on that. But I think currently, from my real experience, I've played around with Notebook LM and the Canvas. I mean, as a user, as Saranya mentioned, this is a delight. This is like absolutely what people want to use it.
Yeah.
Very excited about it.
Yeah, no, 100%, right? I think it's about, and we are not, it's not going to be either or in terms of interaction experiences. It's not going to be one versus the other. On one day, I'm going to want to process information or, on a podcast format. On one day, I'm going to want to just have someone read it through and kind of annotate the document. So I think it's going to be all of those experiences for all of this. And this is just different ways. I mean, this entire thing has been about how AI is more accessible by everybody. I think that's what this boom has been all about. Now it's more about how to start utilizing it and engaging with it in different formats, whatever makes sense to you. I think that's getting more human. I think it's a little bit of the mountain coming to Muhammad and kind of seeing how can the AI work for you as opposed to just, making puzzles for the robot.
Cool. So definitely, Dishant, next time I might just show you Claude and some of the things, right? Like how you can do physics and other simulations on it. With this, right? Dishant, do you want to take over and talk about the next exciting thing?
Sure. I don't know I can match it that excitement, but I will try. So welcome to our third podcast, and today I'm going to talk about a very interesting research published by Microsoft Research Lab. And this research mostly talks about how people can use artificial intelligence in atmospheric forecasting. What I like about this particular research is that if you look at how weather forecasting or air pollution forecasting is done today, is done using statistical methods or numerical forecasting. And while these methods are amazing, this has been functioning for quite some time. The challenge with these existing methods is that they don't take the vast amount of data that is available for them to consider and have a more context in predicting the or forecasting a task that has been given to them. The second thing is that these existing methods are also computationally intensive. It takes a lot of compute power, and hopefully with AI we can try to do both things together, and that's what this particular research finding demonstrates. I'll quickly go into a jump of it what this model is. In a very simple term, what Aurora Foundation model does, it is trained on diverse atmospheric data such as ER5, CMP6, CAMS, and other data available, and it has created a generalized understanding of what an atmospheric model should look like. Correct? So very, very powerful thing. And then you can take this foundation model and train it for specific tasks for your area of interest. Maybe you're looking for a particular dimension of weather forecasting. Maybe you're looking for predicting a weather in region where data is not available. Correct? All of those things is now possible with Aurora, or at least it has a potential to do things. And that's what I really, really like about this research out of it. At architecture level, it is using a swim-based transformer model. Without going much into detail, swim-based transformers are basically, they're a little bit more efficient than the traditional transformers model we have. It has a sliding window approach where it doesn't really look at the entire patch of an image and try to learn about it, but it kind of creates a small segments and then learns iteratively or on a small bits of it. So it breaks down into small pieces out of it. And because it breaks down, it creates a bit of a hierarchy, which allows applications like weather forecasting to be able to kind of a bit more efficient and accurate about it. So at the heart of it, it has encoder and decoder. What encoder does, it basically takes an input and creates a 3D representation of a atmospheric matrix there. And then you use an optimization technique. So LoRa here is a low rank adaptation technique In this, you don't have to, when you update your weights, when you train your model out of it, instead of looking the entire thing, it only focuses on a small matrix that is specific to your task. And then it creates an output of it, and then a decoder takes that output and gives you the result on it. Phenomenally impressive, if you ask me from my perspective. It has shown that uh, our current methods that we have, it can perform 74% better on air quality predictions, and almost 92% better on the weather predictions. And this I'm talking about for air quality, a 5-day air quality prediction index. And for weather, it basically is a high resolution with zero point 0.1 dimension or zero point 0.1 resolution for at least 10 days. So this is super interesting. It's certainly worth considering it from my perspective, given there are interesting, geographical changes we are witnessing. You can look at something which is happening in United States. A few weeks back, it was devastating to see how, the chaos that happened in Florida was really, really disturbing. Few weeks back, Nepal, which is just closer to India, had really, really devastating floods, and we believe that with help of technology, we could be more prepared in addressing some of those issues there. The thing I want to highlight, this is not perfect, so I don't want to put all your hopes into it yet. It's a nice discovery, but it still has its limitation. Correct. So, what are the limitations that we are talking about? The one thing I want to highlight here is that this is a deterministic model. What do I mean by that? Is that a deterministic model basically gives you a one specific forecasting output. Correct. So let's say if you're looking for weather prediction or temperature prediction, it'll give you 30 centigrade or 45 centigrade. Hopefully not. But in real world, weather doesn't function like that. It is not about one particular number, correct? You need a bit of a range, you need a bit of room to play around with that, because if you plan everything just based on one output, and if it doesn't really, it's not successful, then there's a lot of kind of task that depends on it, you have to do again and again. So I strongly feel that a next version of this model should have some bit of probabilistic approach into it, so that you don't just get a one number or one forecast, you get a range out of it, and you can play around with this range and you try to do multiple things out of it. I also like the model does a fantastic work in terms of also adapting dynamic data, correct? So sometimes, let's say, if you look at traditional models, they are very fixed and rigid, correct? If you get some forecasting and now you want to kind of change that forecasting, you have to start from all over again. But Aurora kind of demonstrated that it adapts on dynamic data also significantly well. So that was kind of really interesting for me to see that. And also at much lesser computation time, correct? It doesn't use that much of resources that our traditional methods are using. So I encourage all of you to read this paper and get a bit more understanding about how AI research is pushing the boundaries in the field of sciences. Microsoft is also kind enough to share a lot of other information, like there are a bunch of examples that you could play around with different data sets. There is an API available that you could integrate in your demo or in your applications and play around with it. And I highly encourage people to go and check this out. So great discovery, very first model, lot of potential, and hoping that it will kind of change the landscape of forecasting with the help of artificial intelligence.
This is amazing. Dushan, I have a question. In terms of, like, you highlighted how Aurora is based on certain specificities of how the model is built, and that's what makes some of these predictions better, more accurate, and so on. To your mind, do you see different other applications that you could extend this modeling to?
So right now, so this is a foundation. So generally, the concept of foundation model is that it is trained on diversity of the data, correct? Without a specific goal in mind. You basically put that I mean, you do have a goal in mind, but not a specific, fine-tuned or precise task that you have in mind. And to my mind, that is a super interesting because many times people do not have that much of data required to be trained a model to get that efficacy performance out of it. It's like somebody is coming and building a foundation for you, and then you can build a house or any
Yeah.
any monument on top of it. So I think that's how I look at it. Beyond forecasting, I'm just trying to see where the application of this model could be. Flood forecasting could be one such thing, but again, it would need that additional piece of data to be able to kind of create that. So flood forecasting, weather prediction, and air quality and weather predictions are by out of the box. The model does,
Right.
but you
Right.
can take this and do flood forecasting. You can take and
Right.
I think in some of the other discussion we were talking about, can we look at landslides?
Yeah.
Correct. That is
Yeah.
another interesting area to that. But for that, you need another set of data combined with Aurora and how you can predict. So I think the opportunity, if you ask me, is massive. If you have the data, we should definitely go about it.
Limited only by imagination and data sets.
Yes.
No, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think
So-
what Dushyant you've just mentioned, right? Like people don't have access to data, right? And I think
Yeah.
foundational models are so helpful, right? Like when we were building, one of our products, we didn't have access to data, right? And no publicly available data could exactly match our use cases, right? So that's where data created or leveraging some of these foundational models were absolutely critical, right? Now we have a fully working workflow, right? And we've created our own model based on the data plus, that we've kind of leveraged foundational models like this were absolutely critical. Like we couldn't build our own models if it wasn't for this, right? So I think we have so many researchers, right, on climate. How do they kind of leverage this, right? How's that gap of them understanding that this is something amazing? I think that realization has probably not happened. And second, how do they actually practically use this? If there was a way to bridge that gap, I think we'd see so many interesting research papers or models or smaller use cases, right, in different parts, because you're no longer bounded by data.
So as I said, this is a very early iteration. There's a lot of scope of improvement, both in terms of performance, adaptation, efficiency. But even if people want to use this model today, it doesn't hurt. Imagine, let's say, if somebody in India who has a data for last 5 years about air quality index or about weather prediction, correct? And you don't, if you have a 5 years, fantastic. But if you don't have 5 years, maybe you have a little bit of a small data. Can I take this model, which I just showed you, it is available on GitHub, people can just create their own infra and run this particular model and train it with that specific data for India, and can get information about what could be the air quality index going to be look like in Diwali in Delhi, which in my view would be a very interesting problem to solve, and how good it is. And once you have that information, that imagine, so right now it gives you a deterministic point, which is a particular number, but if you have a range, then you can plan things accordingly. Other thing, you can actually zoom down. So in weather prediction, you can, as I mentioned, you can go to 0.1 resolution and find out which areas are going to get impacted. I strongly believe that AI is a field where we will learn more by sharing and by keeping learning with ourselves. Now, be it modeling, be it architectures, weights, data. Of course, take necessary steps. We don't need to kind of cross the boundary there. But if there is a possibility in terms of driving or advancing the field of AI by doing any of those things, I would recommend that. So with that, I hope you check out Aurora and learn more about it. And our next topic and the next host is someone who is amazing, who is Hawkeye at keeping the track of AI innovations, keeping all of us responsible, keeping all of us accountable, and ensuring we do things right. And it's so nice to have Saranya do this for us. Saranya, over to you.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Dushyant. It's only Dushyant and Soham who are the world's nicest people who will not call me what I am, which is like the Yamraj of AI, who is telling you everything that's going to go wrong.
That's not true.
We will. Give me 5 minutes. No, but Dushyant, I'm actually really excited because you gave me the perfect segue of the topic I want to talk about next, which is about sharing and making things more accessible amongst creators and important stakeholders of AI. And that's how this entire space is going to develop. It's not going to happen with silos, it's not going to happen with siloed thinking, which brings me to licenses. Now, I understand that there is no reason to get this excited about licenses, and everybody is just like automatically like, okay, let's just like turn down the volume and everything. But hear me out, and I'll tell you. I'm going to answer two questions. One is, how does AI licensing impact us as users, and what we want to understand about AI licensing as users and developers and product creators in this space, and also how this is going to help solve for world peace uh, in a bit. Okay, I hope that's got you sufficiently hooked. Now, before we get into what sounds like already legalese and everything, let's take a step back, right? What is licensing? Licensing is effectively terms of use. It's as simple as that. It's when I have something, or I've created something, and I'm going to set out the terms of which you can use this thing of my creation. What a license does is effectively highlight what is important to me, the creator, or the person who owns it. So, for example, if let's say I loan my car to Dushyant and say the terms of the license are you are going to return it by Wednesday. That says that for me, it is important that Thursday the car is back in my hands. I've highlighted that this is the term of the license. If you're not doing it this way, you know what, you don't get the car because Thursday is important to me. That's literally all that a license does. Okay. And I want you to take that like concept, and I'm going to now walk a little bit through the whole AI licensing conversation and where it's been going. So first things first, I'm going to address the elephant in the room, because with the way that the recent AI development has happened, everybody's first instinct is to go OpenAI, open source AI, combination thereof, right? And I think we spoke about this last episode, where even the UN New Digital Compact talked about OpenAI, just open artificial intelligence. And there's a lot more nuance in what that means and where that comes from. Let's take a step back, right? Open source software, a little bit of a history lesson. I started 30 years ago with effectively a bunch of people who were frustrated with lawyers, and they said, enough of this licensing jazz. We will not be beholden to the big tech, big sources, big pockets that be. And so our entire thing of making, in the creation of software, we are going to say that there is no secret sauce to this, or at least we are going to freely share the secret sauce. It does not, I want to clarify here, it does not change ownership. In fact, it highlights ownership. It says that I, as the owner, am making this source code openly available. And it is only me who can do this. I am now saying you can do a lot of things with it. But again, and I'm sure all of you folks who've worked with different open source licensing at some point, there are different variations of it. One is with attribution back. One is, like MIT licenses, do whatever you want. Some are Apache, which is like maybe not some things, maybe not commercial use, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a spectrum of open source licensing. There are some which, like the GPL, is more flexible for if you want to patent your end product. There are some which do not even require attribution. There are some which require you to maybe just attribute the source creator, and so on. So over there, the problem statement that was perceived was there is a certain colonization of the evolution of technology, and open sourcing software is the beat against it. It was kind of the rebellious move where they said, you know what, we are not going to say that everything can only be achieved through a commercial route. You don't have to cough up a whole bunch of money to get access to develop something and to advance technology. We are going to make this open source, right? That was the problem statement, and open source was the solution. Now, and of course, we have in that, just to kind of remind us what was known as Freedom Zero, which is freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose, which was Freedom Zero. That was the first thing. And then, of course, freedom to study how the program works and change it so you do your computing as you wish, freedom to redistribute and distribute copies of your modified version to others. These were in core the freedoms that open source was trying to get at and was trying to assure people who were using open source technology. Now, cut to how we are perceiving AI and what is open in AI, right? And already you can see that it's not a 2-mark answer anymore. It's a 10-mark answer. There are lots of nuance to this. I'm going to just put up a little bit of what was the open source initiative. They did come out with their definition of what counts as open. There are 2 versions of it, which is studying how the system works and its components, use the system for any purpose without having to ask for permission, modify to change its recommendations, predictions, and share the system with or without modifications, right? As you can see, it's basically just an evolution of the open source software freedoms. They've just like a little bit of fine tuning to make it more AI applicable, but this is in core still the freedoms that the open source AI is looking to grant you, right? And they are saying anything that does this works as open source AI. So far, we're on the same page, right? Open source software, tiny difference, open source AI, bada bing, bada boom, we're good. Now, why is this not so easy? And why have I decided to spend time bugging you guys about this? It's because AI and software are just two not the same things. Fundamentally, they are not as simplified. When you're talking about AI, source code is one tiny component of the entire damn thing. And this is when the Pandora's box starts opening up, right? Because when you're talking about the AI system, it includes, and somebody had actually listed this, tried to list it down. You have the AI solution or the algorithm, you have the training data, then you have the production data, which could be like your prompts at the point of trying to create the actual thing. Then you have the output data, and then you're even talking about like subsequent versions of the AI evolutions. But even just with this, even if we just do a freeze frame with this, with just the data and everything that's gone in, what is then copyrightable? What is subject to IP and to what extent? So far in our language and our learning, we were broadly able to make a distinction between a software program, like a source code, and the data that flows through the source code or flows through the program. We were able to understand it. At the very least, we were able to at least uniquely identify this source code or this program uses this data set, right? We were able to do like a 1:1 correlation. For example, it's not like LLMs are the first time we've had bots. We've had bots earlier, but it's just that those bots were trained on a very specific set of data. Trained is not even the right word, but they were running a script based on a very clear algorithm or a very clear data set. Now, the origin of the data and who owns the training data and then who owns the output have become very huge questions, right? And I know all of us, we've encountered this, we've come across a combination of all of these questions at some point. But I'll tell you how this impacts the licensing story. So for example, I think even Llama recently went towards an end-use restriction, which was research-oriented. Part of it, rather than saying it's for research, what I think they're trying to highlight is not for commercial purposes, because the training data is not that determinable or not that easily identifiable anymore. The training data is not procured through very clear licenses. That's what we're getting at. We're saying that in certain cases, they may not have complete confidence about the training data that has gone in. And so they cannot very clearly say, we have all of the copyright over the training data. So we have the ability to allow you to use this for commercial purposes. That clear chain of thought may not exist, or at least not with 100% confidence, which is why some of the subsequent licenses are moving towards use it for research purposes only, which is basically saying, do not commercially exploit this, because I cannot assure you that the core of it or the build up to this does not have any restrictions on this ground. Before I get into further chaos, is everybody with me? If you have any questions, please jump in. This is going to be a little bit of everywhere before we get to the promised land.
This is very helpful, Saranya. Thank you for clarifying this. See, many times what happens is that a lot of us have a background in technology, and some of the licensing that has been used that we have understood when we started. But now there are new licensing terms, though they have similar naming conventions, but their actual purpose could be very different. So thank you for clarifying that. Even I learned something new, honestly, today. The second thing, there's a lot of example of llama. There's a lot of noise about it, like why they change, and there's a lot of outburst in the. And many times you kind of see a very strong stand about the organization that okay, they are not innovation friendly, they are not really kind of they're creating this walled garden. But the nuances that you explained today, like they are being honest that I don't have a confidence in my own. So I don't want you to take a high risk on it. So I think clarification was extremely helpful. Thank you for clarifying it. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. I mean, let's be clear. Far be it from me to be the advocate of big tech. I'm not, even though we've done that. But I'm saying that there may be reasons, even ChatGPT, they moved from having relatively more open licensing to not so much anymore. And that is maybe them just trying to protect their IP. And you know what? That's completely fair. But I think this brings us to another question, which was clarified in, I think, one of the FAQs by Rail, and we'll of course discuss Rail. Of course, we have to in just a bit, where they actually clarified that they do not care about open sourcing the source code because they're like, that's only part of it. Which brings us to the actual, what is the actual IP in an AI system, right? These are the questions, but let's say the weights, the parameters, that's the stuff that is the actual secret sauce. They're relatively pretty chill about open sourcing source code, and they believe that that's not really which impacts it. And we'll get to Rail in just a bit. So with all of this, I think another bit I want to capture, and maybe we should talk about it in subsequent conversations about the ownership of generated content, the delta in when you start learning things like you mentioned, Dishan. If I start adopting a foundation model, then where does the IP go? What is the IP source? What do I claim ownership of? Is it like ideally I claim ownership only the delta model improvements that I have worked on? The foundation model, of course, will retain with Microsoft in that case. And then what can I commercially exploit, right? And so on and so forth. Or is it just a thing of until nobody tells me to stop, I'm just going to keep doing what I want? These are the questions we have to get at. Which brings me to, of course, Rail, right? And as we all know, responsible AI licensing, which is the full form of the acronym Rail, has taken it as an end-use licensing agreement, where their argument is that we are going to restrict the end usage of our AI systems. And they have different DAMs. They suggest different acronyms or other different prefixes, rather, for the different systems. So they have Rail as the base concept. Then D is for data. So if you have D Rail, which is that this is going to manage an end-use restriction of the data. A is for algorithm, M is for model, and S is for source code. So if you see any of these prefixes of D, A, M, S against a Rail license, that gives you an indicator of what that license is looking to restrict the end use of, right? Which is data, algorithm, model, source code, or something new that they're going to come up with eventually. Another fact is a bunch of other end-use restriction licenses are also out there. I'm going to talk about them briefly before I double down on Rail. You have OPT 175B, which is again by Meta. This is a restrictive license enabling the use of model weights for research purposes while establishing a set of use restrictions. You have Sear, which does a very similar piece. You have one which is by the Tsinghua University in China, which is the GLM 130B license, which is a restrictive license enabling use of the model weights for research purposes. So as you can see, things are starting to get a little more nuanced. There's a very specific, they are getting very specific about what exactly they're licensing. What is the end use, which is in model weights, not for commercial purposes, for research purposes. And this is where the conversation is heading towards. So as you can see, Rail, like I mentioned, got into end-use restrictions. And I'm going to look at this piece, which is the attachment A. And this, my friends, is how we're going to achieve world peace. Stay with me. Rail's entire objective is we will determine that the AI models are not used for unethical or irresponsible end uses of AI. And they've tried to list out what they, to their mind, determine as ethical or responsible AI end usage. Check this out. Violates any laws, purpose of exploiting, harming, or attempting to exploit minors, verifiably false information, generate personal identifiable information, information that can disclaim that the text is machine generated, disparage, harass others, impersonate others, adversely impact an individual's legal right or otherwise creates modifying enforceable obligation, discriminating or harming individuals or groups, exploit any of the vulnerabilities of a specific group, has the effect of discriminating against individuals or groups, provide medical advice and medical results interpretation, generate or disseminate information for the purpose to be used for administration of justice, law enforcement, immigration or asylum processes. I want to take a freeze frame here and look at how the past 30 years have evolved. Just look at how far we've come. 30 years ago, the biggest problem that the OSS movement came out of thin air. FOSS was created as a rebellion against the biggest threat perceived to the advancement of technology at that age, which is there will be a walled gardens of money not allowing us to advance technology. That was the biggest threat perceived at that time. And look at where we are today. It has jumped from opening it out is the least of our problems. Let's run with that assumption. The IP protection is a different problem. Here, we are talking about what are the ways in which we can manage the end usage. It's no longer about IP. It's about how we are going to evaluate the usage of AI in our daily lives. It is about asylum processes and immigration and discriminating against individuals or groups. This is a very clear reflection of the worst case scenarios in our minds as technologists, as people in this space. This is actually the worst case scenarios of our time. But I will take a leaf from Dushyant's book today, and we're looking more optimistic than pessimistic. For me, this is a good thing, where the only way to start fixing the world is by knowing what the problems are. This has laid out a laundry list of some, even Rail admits, some of the worst case scenarios of where the technology can go. Once you realize that the problem statement is not about protecting IP, but the problem statement is about how intelligently, usefully, and conscientiously we will be able to use technology, then we are in the right direction of trying to see how best we can use it and how we can protect ourselves and the world around us in the usage of this technology. So today, I think licensing is going to help solve for world peace.
Super interesting, Saranya. One question, right? Like, so for existing software, right? Like, there's so much open source software, right? And we never talk about how it's used, right? There are always malicious actors using it for all kinds of different purposes, right? So it's a whole rethinking, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't think the backport to like existing software as it is, it should be for.
No, Soham, you are spot on. And I think that's exactly the point, right? Like the fact that, like I mentioned right at the beginning, licensing just highlights what you deem important at that time. It's just setting out, it's reflecting the creator's most urgent, most important objectives in sharing that with you. And I think it's a reflection of our times where open source was just saying like, it's openly shareable. As long as we are all sharing information freely, we are going to be fine. But here it's saying, it's taking a whole different view of licensing. These are two completely different objectives and two completely different movements towards achieving those objectives. And they're not comparable at all. It's just saying that, and to my mind, this actually does not solve or address many of the IP conversations around AI. It does not talk about what about the source of data. It does not talk about that. It doesn't talk about anything else. And it's amazing that this is what has caught so much traction, where it doesn't talk about any of the earlier concerns that one usually has around licensing. It's taken a completely different view and saying, we have this as the most urgent problem, and that's what we're going to solve for. IP is somebody else's license. Talk to them. This is about ensuring that the end usage is going to be of a certain characteristic. And 100% to your point, like, why didn't other softwares, earlier softwares, why wasn't this part of the consideration? 30 years ago, it's not that software could not, like, could I create chaos with an Excel sheet? Hell yes. But there was no end use restriction like this for Excel. Why has it come today? Why didn't it come then? And what's the difference? I think it's a reflection of our times. I think it's just about what the current conversation is and where we're going. And it's absolutely not one or the other. I think the way one would end up using it is there will be evolution in IP protection around AI, which is currently just completely inadequate. We do not have the vocabulary of adequately licensing a complex AI model. But that will be combined with an end-use restriction like Rail. It will be combined with something else because AI is that, right? It's multiple building blocks. And I think licensing will also work in that way.
For me, few things that stayed out in this discussion, Saranya. So very, very insightful. Thank you for keep bringing these topics to the discussion. In last 30 years, the impact of technology in our life has magnified. I mean, you could see that. Right? With what purpose many of those avenues are created clearly does not really fit with the newer requirement and evolving kind of usage of this wonderful technology. So clearly, like, thank you for calling it out. Like, black is black, white is white. Very important to do that. The second thing, as you rightly mentioned, about while the initial licenses are mostly focused on the authorship and usage rights and some of those things, given the technology advancement, now we are talking about governance, safety, correct? We are talking about IPs, definitely, but there are like other dimensions that has been added towards it.
100%.
And people who have that transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary way to look at technology, I think need to come forward and kind of stitch that line, as you rightly mentioned. That, hey, old data, model, output, production data. So this entire journey needs to be kind of visualized, re-emphasized over and over again for people to do that. I found this discussion, I don't have answer, I don't have question, I'm sorry, but I'm just kind of, I'm speechless, and thank you for bringing this up.
And thank you for sitting through a conversation on licensing with rapt attention. I really appreciate it.
No, the reason I was listening through is that where is world peace in that? I was looking.
No, I mean, no hyperbole intended. Genuinely, I think it is absolutely to your point. I appreciate that the licensing conversation has gone as far as it has, where it's talking about a whole new dimension of what is important to our technology conversation today. And I think there's just complete reflection of what we feel as a community. It is what is the most urgent problem for AI. It's about how crazy can things go. It's about how bad are things going to go. And of course, Rail also admits that the license is only very much a small part of it. There's going to have to be governance bodies assessing impact. What is actually, how do you evaluate violation of these terms? There's so many open questions. This is kind of just like a lantern into the sky of saying, this is what our view is. This is our best hope for how AI evolves. And nobody has answers. Like, for example, there was a long time ago, I'm talking about open data sets and the daydream of having vibrant, diverse, inclusive data sets openly available to everybody. A long time ago, there was this movement called consent to research. There was this gentleman called John Wilbanks, who was a person who then joined the Apple Health project, where he had started this thing of consent to research, where basically he said, what if because medical information, especially in the US, is so complex and so difficult to get hold of, and thankfully, with privacy protections adequately in place, the consent to research movement was people volunteering their medical information towards creating data sets and saying, can we then make a data set which is richly available to everybody? And this was like 2011, 12. And then since then, it evolved a lot. And then that gentleman went and joined Apple, which formed part of the Apple Health Kit and things like that. But I'm saying these are questions of the fundamental building blocks of AI systems have been an open question for a long time. And the complexity of that has just been increasing. And the end usage bit is like this tangential thing which doesn't address all of that, but somehow seems just in the fact that we're all levitating towards this more than anything else is a true reflection of what's topmost on our mind and what we all are valuing the most. So yeah, as an academic, I'm very interested in how the puzzles unravel. But just as user slash citizen, I'm glad that there are others thinking of end use as a major dimension to be figured out.
Thanks, Aranya. What a good note to end on. Please.
Right? From me, that too. This is new. This is new. I think Dushyant and Soham are rubbing off on me. But let's.
No, I think with you there, I think we need people like you to continue championing, bringing it up. So yes, all your work.
Thank you, sir. And on that fantastic note, I think we will wrap up the episode for the day. Thank you all for tuning in and hope to see you in the next episode. See you.